Good morning. It's January 4th, 2026, and this video is in reference to Edward Bernaise. Okay, this is from Wikipedia, but he's known as the father of propaganda. So I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about this guy. So Edward Louis Bernaise, from 1891 to 1995, that's the extent of his life, an Austrian American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, referred to in his obituary as, quote, the father of public relations, end quote. While credited with advancing the profession of public relations, his techniques have been criticized for manipulating public opinion, often in ways that undermine individual autonomy and democratic values. His best-known campaigns include a 1929 effort to promote female smoking by branding cigarettes as feminist, torches of freedom, and his work for the United Fruit Company in 1950, connected with the CIA orchestrated overthrow of the democratically elected Guatemalan government in 1954. His involvement in Guatemala facilitated U.S. imperialism and um, contributed to decades of civil unrest and repression, raising ethical concerns about his role in undermining democratic governance. He worked for dozens of major American corporations, including Procter and Gamble and General Electric, and for government agencies, politicians, and nonprofit organizations. Of his many books, Crystallizing Public Opinion in 1923 and Propaganda 1928 gained special attention as early efforts to define and theorize the field of public relations, citing works of writers such as Gustav Le Bon, Wilfred Trotter, Walter Lippmann, and Sigmund Freud, his own double uncle. Just going to step out so you can see my background here. He described the masses, that's us, as irrational and subject to herd instinct, and he outlined how skilled practitioners could use crowd psychology and psychoanalysis to control them in desired ways. This is not too different than what Machiavelli talked about. Bernays later synthesized many of these ideas in his post-war book, Public Relations, in 1945, which outlines the science of managing information released to the public by an organization in a manner most advantageous to the organization. He does this by first providing an overview of the history of public relations and then provides insight into its application. Bernaise was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life. Despite his recognition, his work has been linked to the rise of modern propaganda techniques that some argue have eroded democratic engagement and suppressed dissent. He was the subject of a full-length biography by Larry Tye entitled The Father of Spin, 1999, and later an award-winning 2002 documentary for the BBC by Adam Curtis entitled The Century of the Self. I'm going to skip family and education and career and go down to notable clients and campaigns. Bernays used ideas of his uncle Sigmund Freud to help convince the public, among other things, that bacon and eggs was the true all-American breakfast. I happen to agree with that. I think a lot of the foods we eat back then even were bad for us, and today they're full of chemicals. So uh, organic would be the best way to go. That's a bit expensive, but I agree that bacon and egg is the all-American breakfast, but he used it for promotion of meat. So in the 1930s, his Dixie Cup campaign was designed to convince American consumers that only disposable cups were sanitary by linking the image of an overflowing cup with subliminal images of genitalia and venereal disease. This is the same thing that when I was taking classes to learn hypnosis, that you get people to shy away or stop doing a certain thing by relating it in their minds to something negative. So, what he's doing here is he's saying that regular cups are the same as like venereal disease. So, you get this ugly feeling of using these cups. And so, you would move to using disposable cups, which in itself is not a bad thing, except for that he did it not to help people, but he did it to um, not to help the masses, but to help a corporation or some corporations with the sales of their cups. And of course, now we have plastics everywhere. He was publicity director for the 1939 New York World's Fair. Okay, so they have Lights Golden Jubilee, but they only link an article. They don't say anything about it. Political clients. In 1924, Bernaise set up a vaudeville pancake breakfast for Calvin Coolidge to change his stuffy image prior to the 1924 election. Entertainers, including Al Jolson, Raymond Hitchcock, and the Dolly Sisters, performed on the White House lawn. The event was widely reported by American newspapers, with the New York Times running the story under the headline, "President Nearly Laughs." A desperate Herbert Hoover consulted with Bernaise a month before 1932 election. Bernaise advised Hoover to create disunity within his opposition and to present an image of him as an invincible leader. Bernaise advised William O'Dwyer in his candidacy for mayor of New York City on how to appear in front of different demographics. For example, he should tell Irish voters about his actions against the Italian mafia and Italian voters about plans to reform the police department. To Jews, he should appear as a committed opponent of the Nazis. So, this is something I'm also reading about. It's called blending, and it's part of storytelling, and it's part of propaganda or rhetoric. And it's when you take a couple of different things or more than a couple of things and try to make them seem like they're one. So he's trying to appear like the good guy to all these different people by giving them all what they want. So he's blending himself into promoting someone that's promoting the police department, Jews, the Irish. So he's blended himself into the everybody's guy, okay, or Mr. Dworer. So he helped to name the president's emergency committee for employment, suggesting this name as preferable to the committee for unemployment. During World War II, Bernays advised the Office of War Information as well as the Army and Navy. He was chairman of the National Advisory Committee of the Third U.S. War Loan, co-chairman of the Victory Book Campaign, and part of the New York State Defense Council. During the Cold War, he advised the United States Information Agency. Bernays reported turning down the Nazis, Nicaragua, under the Somoza family, Francisco Franco, and Richard Nixon as clients. He has a list of nonprofit clients, Committee on Public Methods in Social Work, Jewish Mental Health Society, the Book Publishers Research Institute, the New York Infirmary for Women and Children, Committee for Consumer Legislation, Friends of Danish Freedom and Democracy. Oh, Danish Freedom and Democracy. Freud, 1920, Bernaise organized the publication of Freud's introductory lectures on psychoanalysis in the US, sending royalty money to his uncle in Vienna. Freud turned down further offers at promotion, such as possible lecture tour and an invitation to write 3,000-word newspaper columns, $4,000 each on topics such as the wife's mental place in the home and what a child thinks about. Tobacco. In 1927, Bernays worked briefly for Leggett and Myers, makers of Chesterfield cigarettes. He pulled a stunt against campaigning brand Lucky Strike, which involved mocking the endorsements of opera singers who said Lucky Strikes were kind to your voice. George Washington Hill, head of the American Tobacco Company, which made Lucky Strike, promptly hired Bernays away from Liggett and Myers. When he started working for American Tobacco Company, Bernays was given the objective of increasing Lucky Strike sales among women who, for the most part, had formerly avoided smoking. The first strategy was to persuade women to smoke cigarettes instead of eating. Bernays began by promoting the ideal of thinness itself, using photographers, artists, newspapers, and magazines to promote the special beauty of thin women. Medical authorities were found to promote the choice of cigarettes over sweets. Homemakers were cautioned that keeping cigarettes on hand was a social necessity. Torches of Freedom. The first campaign succeeded. Women smoked more cigarettes. American Tobacco Company brought in more revenue, and Lucky Strike led the market in growth. But a taboo remained on women smoking in public. Bernays consulted with a psychoanalyst, Abraham Brill, a student of Freud's, who reported to him that cigarettes represented torches of freedom for women whose feminine desires were increasingly suppressed by their role in the modern world. So torches of freedom. Now, again, we have blending. We have the blending of torches and the blending of freedom, but also they add women into the mix. So this is a good article for several different reasons. And one of them is going to be that in the future, I plan on talking more about blending and how politicians do it and what are the consequences of it and how it completely goes over most people's heads. But it also creates a really enticing story. People become really enthralled with the idea of like the secret baby. Because remember, we talked about some of these things, these blendings that judges will include in their court case writings, their opinions. They include these things in their opinions, these blendings. And some of the students that went over some of these court cases said that um, their outcome is not even supported by what they claim that their facts are or their reasons. So we're going to look more in depth on blending, but this is also a good article for the purposes of understanding how propaganda has started, what it's done to people and their minds. There was also a guy that brought up the idea, and he's a retired military behavior analyst. You've probably heard of him. He's got millions of subscribers, Chase Hughes, who said that something to the effect that are you who you are, or are you who propaganda has told you to be, that you've accepted as being your identity, which is not really your identity. It's not really you. So are you being your authentic self, or are you just going along with um, public opinion? So that's an interesting thing to look at, and we're going to look at some of that also. It's tied into propaganda. Okay, so Bernays wrote, enjoy my view. I get to see it every day. Because it should appear as news with no division of the publicity, actresses should be definitely out. On the other hand, if young women who stand for feminism, someone from the Women's Party, say, could be secured, the fact that the movement would be advertised too would not be bad. Well, they should be good looking. They shouldn't be too modelly. 3 for each church covered should be sufficient. each church. Yeah. So, of course, they are not to smoke simply as they come down the church steps. They are to join in the Easter parade, puffing away. The march went as planned, as did the ensuing publicity with ripples of women smoking permanently across the country. Green Ball. In 1934, Bernaise was asked to deal with women's apparent reluctance to buy Lucky Strikes because their green and red package clashed with the standard female fashions. When Bernaise suggested changing the package to a neutral color, Hill refused, saying that he already spent millions advertising the package. Bernaise then worked to make green a fashionable color. The centerpiece of his efforts was the Green Ball, a social event at the Waldorf Astoria hosted by Narcissa Cox Vanderlip. The pretext for the ball and its unnamed underwriter was that proceeds would go to charity. Famous society women would attend wearing green dresses. Manufacturers and retailers of clothing and accessories were advised of the excitement growing around the green color. Intellectuals were enlisted to give highbrow talks on the theme of green. Before the ball had taken place, newspapers and magazines, encouraged in various ways by Bernays' office, had latched on to the idea that green was all the rage. Modus operandi. Throughout the job, Bernays concealed the fact that he was working for American Tobacco Company and succeeded in keeping his own name out of the affair as well. Staff were instructed never to mention his name. Third parties were used, and various notable people received payments to promote smoking publicly as if on their own initiative. Decades later, however, Bernays boasted about his role. Bernays did not smoke cigarettes himself and persistently tried to induce his wife Doris to quit. United Fruit in Guatemala. So you can read about that if you choose to. And if I read this whole thing, it's about 184 pages. So I'm not going to go into all of it. You can go back and read this if you choose. But you're getting the idea, I'm sure. So, under the headline of techniques and third parties, Bernays argued that the covert use of third parties was morally legitimate because those parties were morally autonomous actors. Quote, if you can influence the leaders, either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway, he said. In order to promote sales of bacon, for example, he conducted research and found that the American public ate very light breakfast of coffee, maybe a roll or orange juice. He went to his physician and found that a heavy breakfast was sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast because the body loses energy during the night and needs it during the day. He asked the physician if he would be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his, confirming his judgment. About 4,500 answered back, all concurring that a more significant breakfast was better for the health of the American people than a light breakfast. He arranged for this finding to be published in newspapers throughout the country with headlines like 4,500 physicians urge bigger breakfasts, while other articles stated that bacon and eggs should be a central part of breakfast. And as a result of these actions, the sale of bacon went up. So there's a lot of things that I can talk about just from this quote that has to do with the medical industry and how they're also susceptible to the changes in fashion and opinion, and they kind of go with the flow, and they can be persuaded to change their ideas about what's good for the body and what's not good for the body. So instead of just looking at facts and numbers and results, they're looking at what's going on out there in the public and how can we be persuaded to do things differently or to have a different opinion, which is not good in my opinion, because it's not promoting health, it's promoting fashion and industry organizations, things like that. So describing the response to his campaign for Ivory Soap, Bernays wrote, as if actuated by the pressure of a button, people began working for the client instead of the client begging people to buy. Businesses found these covert methods irresistible. Struther Walker and Paul Schuyler wrote in Business Finds Its Voice in 1938 that Bernaise had offered a solution to popular skepticism of business, which arose in the Depression. Better to implant an idea in a group leader's mind and let him spread it than to write up an idea and send it to the papers as a release in the old-fashioned way. So textbooks are no different. Um, they the writers of textbooks can be swayed by some opinion and then put it in the textbooks, and then doctors or lawyers or whatever are adhering to those false those propagandas. Really, they go into the scientific approach, and then we have a headline of philosophy. Okay, I'm going to read some of this. The philosophies behind things, I think, are some of the most important things you can learn. And so Bernaise touted the idea that the masses are driven by factors outside their conscious understanding, and therefore that their minds can and should be manipulated by the capable few. Intelligent men must realize that propaganda is the modern instrument by which they can find for productive ends and help to bring order out of chaos. Again, this is Machiavellian. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires and control the public mind. From his book Propaganda, 1928, pages 9 and 10. Propaganda was portrayed as the only alternative to chaos. One way Bernaise reconciled manipulation, again, manipulation is Machiavellian, with liberalism was his claim that the human masses should inevitably succumb to manipulation and therefore be good propagandists. And therefore, the good propagandists could compete with the evil without incurring any marginal moral cost. In his view, the minority which uses this power is increasingly intelligent and works more and more on behalf of ideas that are socially constructive. Unlike some of the other public relations practitioners, Bernaise advocated centralization and planning. Marvin Olasky calls his 1945 book, Take Your Place at the Peace Table, a clear appeal for a form of mild cooperate socialism. So they've got Death and Legacy publications, references for their reading. You can find his publications on the internet, Amazon, whatever. Um, but that's the article on Wikipedia. I'm sure there's a ton more that can be learned from him from other sources. That's just sort of getting our feet wet into the father of propaganda and public relations. And so we're going to continue talking about this kind of stuff more in the near future. And I hope that you all come back for another video. There will be more coming out soon. And I guess have a good new year. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.